the reason I've chosen this particular reading will no doubt become evident. Stink Bomb and Ketchup Face, well, the Badgers, who are the bad guys, have escaped from prison and are up to evilness and wickedness. And so along with King Toothbrush Weasel and Malcolm the Cat, Stink Bomb and Ketchup Face are going somewhere to seek wisdom. The Loose Chippings Library was the grandest building in Great Kerfuffle, much grander than the Royal Palace, which was really just a small cottage with a couple of thatched turrets stuck on and a cat in a soldier's jacket standing guard outside. This was because the only sensible king that Great Kerfuffle had ever had, who was called King Sensible, I love almost all of it, but there's one bit that just doesn't work. For those of you who don't know the film, James Stewart's character is persuaded not to kill himself, or saved from killing himself by an angel, who then decides to show him that his life is worthwhile by showing him what the lives of the people he loves would have been like if he'd never lived. So he sees all these people, having miserable lives because they lacked his influence in their life. And then he goes, "What about my wife? Where's my wife?" He's really distraught by this time. And the angel says, "She's locking up." "What do you mean locking up?" "She's locking up at the library." "George, she's an old maid." And then cut to the library, and his wife, who, in real life, when he existed, from childhood, could you see her as a little girl, and she's the feistiest little girl, and she knows what she wants. She grows up into a strong, confident woman, and suddenly, she's turned into this timid, mousy librarian. Not only that, suddenly she needs glasses. Like, how did that happen? Her husband was never born, so her eyesight's pathetic. The point is, we all know that's not what librarians are like, And you hear a lot about librarians and libraries and how they need to modernize. Hands up if you're fed up of hearing how libraries need to modernize. Because generally, when somebody tells you that libraries need to modernize, they haven't been in a library since they were little. Famously, probably most of you know about this, but famously a couple of years back, the comedian Frank Skinner wrote an article, I think for his local newspaper, maybe for a national one, sort of talking about library cuts. And, well, the thing is, libraries need to modernize, and they need to do this, and they need to do that. And one of his local librarians wrote to him and said, "You haven't been to a library lately, have you? Why don't you come down and have a look?" And bless him, he did. And the next week, his column was, "Okay, I got that wrong, didn't I?" This is what libraries like. You know what I was saying? That libraries should be like. They're like that, only it's better, and I've joined the library, and they're great. But very often, as I say, when people say libraries need to modernize, it's your ideas about libraries that need to modernize. The libraries have got there already. Even worse is people who say libraries need to move into the future. Because generally when somebody says, especially politicians, when they say libraries need to move into the future, I look at what they're doing and I think you've been reading the wrong kind of science fiction. I mean, really, if we're going to build a library service for the future, I want it to be the kind of future in Star Trek. Where the world is living together in peace and everybody's nice to each other and they value knowledge and wisdom and they're going out on peaceful missions to the rest of the galaxy to bring everybody together. Some of these people who say we're moving into the future, they've obviously been reading The Hunger Games or Brave New World, But some of this comes back to what I really appreciated the comment somebody at the back made during question time during the last session, which is basically that a lot of the people, most of the people making the decisions about libraries are not library users. They're not the type of people who use libraries. They have no idea what libraries are like, and they have no idea of the effect that their actions have on people who do use libraries and people who need libraries and people who value libraries. I live in Gloucestershire, and as most of you know, one of the first, the first councils in the country to decide that we needed to move libraries into the future with knives, and they held a series of consultations, which in Gloucestershire at least is what politicians mean when they say, "We'd like to patronise you," and then ignore everything you say. And I went along to one of these consultations in our local library, and I sort of stood behind 15 other people in a queue, all of whom told the council member responsible for the library's plan exactly what they thought of her plans, in no uncertain terms. Some of them may even use the C word, by which I mean obviously conservatives. Sorry, but you know, I wasn't going to get party political, but really, sometimes you can't help it. Anyway, by the time I got to her, she was like a sulky teenager called before the head teacher. You know, and she said, right, so what do you think? I'd like to tell you exactly what you think, what I think of your plans. Okay, so, you know, I'm talking about this and that, and then I said, you know, and the fact that you're cutting down the number of qualified librarians, and she kind of switched into professional mode at this point. You know, clearly something in her brain went, I have a prepared answer to this one. And she sat up and went, well, what you may not know is that actually some time ago, we took the decision that it was more important that, you know, rather than having paper qualifications, it was more important that our library staff, you know, were good with people. I said, yes. I'm fully aware that you've been running down the library service for years already. That doesn't give you an excuse to do it anymore. She went, but, you know, like you said, it really seems to me that the people in power, you know, I mean, I'm sure what Paul on the panel said is correct. There's nobody out there, you know, sitting under a volcano stroking a white cat like, how can we destroy libraries for everybody? It's just that they don't care. And the reason they don't care is that they don't know enough to care. And the reason they don't know enough to care is that they don't care enough to find out. I was reading this week, and some of you may have come across this story, about a chap who got very concerned about the cuts to local services, such as libraries and museums, and wrote to his county council about it. And unusual, because, you know, I don't know what your experience is. When I write to a politician, when I write to my MP, I generally get something that's cut and pasted from Conservative Central Office. I know this because I wrote to our local MP saying, you know, school libraries should be statutory. Can you do something about that? And got this cut and paste letter, and I showed it to the secretary of CWIG, the Children's Writers and Illustrators Group, which is the group I used to chair in the Society of Authors. And she said, oh, that's interesting. Here are 2 other letters that I've had from MPs to authors in other parts of the country. Look, compare the sentences. Yeah. And every single sentence, word for word, in my MP's letter appeared somewhere in these other 2 letters. But anyway, this chap who was concerned, Dave, his name is, who wrote to his local council, and he got a 6-page letter back, personally written by the chair of his local county council, he's in Oxfordshire. And, you know, if you and I wrote to the council, we wouldn't get a 6-page letter personally written to the chair. But, yeah, you know, there may be a reason why Dave is different. You know, it could be that his letter was particularly well crafted. It could be that it made some points that the chair of the council hadn't thought of before and wanted to address personally. It could be that he's an MP. It could be that he's the MP for Whitney. It could be that that means he's the Prime Minister. And if you haven't seen this story, seriously, look it up. George Monbiot wrote this great article about it, and you can read the whole letter. The leader of Oxfordshire County Council sort of writing back very patiently, saying, well, the thing is, your suggestion of selling off even more assets, 1, is not sustainable as a long-term solution, and 2, may not actually be legal. B, when you say we should cut more in the back room, have you seen our back room? There's nothing left. And C, I really cannot accept your contention that we've had a slight drop in funding when that slight drop is 37%. So when even the Prime Minister of a government that is cutting our public services, I think cutting them to the bone is not putting it too strongly, is going, why are our public services so much in decline? Why are you cutting our public services? We have to conclude that he hasn't bothered to find out what his policies will do. Now, when I was chair of CWIG, Joe was the secretary of the Society of Author employee. After I'd made a couple of public speeches, she sort of took me aside and said, it might be better to use phrases such as short-sighted policies rather than words like idiots. I said, fair enough. All I can say is that there are a lot of short-sighted policies in central government. And not just central government. I think it was the mayor of Doncaster a few years back who said, why do people even need libraries when they can buy books in Tesco's? To which I can only reply, why do we even need idiots in local government when we've got plenty in Whitehall? Anyway, time is almost up and you have been promised a song. I do hope you'll join in if you know it. And it's just, you know, a bit more about how they don't understand and they don't care. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with Ed Vaizey? Is he clinically thick or is he criminally wicked? Or is he just lazy? Somebody tell me before it drives me crazy. Can anybody tell me what the hell is going on with Ed Vaizey? Well, he said the right things when he was in opposition, but now he's taking up a contradictory position. His policy creation is conducted by omission, with the enemies of libraries are taking as permission to cut the library service to a pitiful condition. It's part of dissertation and partial abolition, and sadly Ed is silently complicit in the mission to cut and cut and cut. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with Ed Vaizey? Is he clinically thick or is he criminally wicked? Or is he just lazy? Somebody tell me before it drives me crazy. Can anybody tell me what the hell is going on with Ed Vaizey? Is he lacking any feeling of responsibility, or has he been promoted way beyond his own ability? Then he sits complacent in his office at the ministry, leaving all his duties to campaigners and judiciary. His words about the world sound like absolute hypocrisy. Now he sees this crisis as a kind of opportunity to hand our libraries over to the big society and cut and cut and cut. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with Ed Vaizey? Is he clinical? Tell me before it drives me crazy. Can anybody tell me what the hell is going on with Ed Vaizey? What's wrong 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 with Ed Vaizey? Do join me. What's wrong with Ed Vaizey? What's wrong with Ed Vaizey? What's wrong with Ed Vaizey? What's wrong with Ed Vaizey?
Thank you very much. As I said before, that's it. That's all, folks. Those noble civic volunteers mentioned